So next, Sean from Adexa, where you're at. Oh, yeah. So the floor is yours. Best clock.
Thank you very much. Hello, is it good morning? It is still good morning, everybody. My name is Sean Jockin. I'm the Solution Director for Adexa EMEA. So that involves articulating all customer problems and turning that into and using our solutions in the best possible way to actually solve those problems. So we're going to be talking today about disrupting S&OP through disruption intelligence. So what does this mean? This means that there's a number of disruptions that are actually occurring, and this is more from the supply side than it is from the demand side that we focus on for this. These are things which are where you've got inventory not being available. There's various different geopolitical, different economic impacts that are actually having on availability of materials, the prices of materials, and the impact that has on the supply chain. So we're going to talk about how, and in a slightly different way to what we've looked at in terms of scenario analysis as well, that we maybe don't necessarily need scenarios. If you can do this in a dynamic way, taking some of the data feeds which are available nowadays, and actually using these to actually then feed into your S&OP process, but using some of those disturbances which are coming at a lower level, coming from S&OE processes and execution, and actually feeding that back in and trying to work out how those could improve things. So about Adexa, I won't talk too long about this. Worldwide presence, headquartered in Los Angeles, been around for coming up for 30 years now. Lots of large enterprise customers. Show you a slide in a second on that one. So we do work with headquartered in Los Angeles, development in Toronto, quite a large presence in Asia, because you'll see why, because of the customer base that we have. Adexa is really focused on manufacturing organizations. So we do a lot of complex manufacturing. We talked about different flavors. So if you're not really so much of a manufacturer, if you don't have really complex manufacturing, a lot of different parts coming into your supply chain, a lot of different resource constraints, material constraints that are actually playing into this. It's probably not one of the flavors for you, but if you are into that space, this is where our focus area is. You can see some of the customers up there. We've got a lot of different customers there that are all related to complex manufacturing. High-tech, semiconductors, heavy industry, some pharma. Okay, business challenges associated with S&OP. So a lot of these are related to the revenue, the inventory, the cost base. Yeah, a bit disruptive. Pretty boring slide there. So we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to go through it. This isn't a lesson in S&OP at all. This is how we can connect different parts of the supply chain together from S&OE to S&OP and feeding back. So I think this quote came up earlier on. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. This was Mike Tyson. So what does this mean? This means that no matter how good our plan is, how good a plan we've created, we need to be dynamic in terms of being able to respond to all of these changes that take place. And can you do scenario planning when you're in a boxing ring? No, you need to be able to respond very quickly. You can't get all your scenarios out and take a look and say, what are we going to do next? Even your coach can't even shout from the sidelines, what are we going to do next? You've got to actually roll with the punches and then decide how you're going to take. And resilience, this is supply chain resilience. What are you trying to do within the supply chain? You're actually taking a punch, and it's how you react to that, what you do to it, what you do, how you react, how you respond to that, and then how you recover to it. And if you look at that, that's one of the main ways of describing what supply chain resilience is. And we keep talking about that, but we keep talking about creating scenarios to build supply chain resilience. But it's actually our response and how we recover from it that actually gives us that resilience. So moving on, I'm going to introduce you to the devil. Yeah, the devil's identifying as a male today. So the devil, it's usually something that is going to cause you issues and bring up problems. These can be transient ones. So these are things which are very short-term events. They could be long-term structural things, such as market changes, such as availability of resources, or it could just be internal things. So you have a breakdown of a machine, breakdown of a production line. You lose a production line for a certain period of time. It can be external sources. So external sources, such as a supplier going broke. What happens then? You've lost your supplier. You need to analyze then in the market what you're going to do after that. Some of these things you have to be able to respond to relatively quickly, especially some of these shorter term events. So the devil occurs all over the place at different points in time, long term into the future, short term, but is omnipresent. And we see this all the time. This is what causes so much loss in terms of supply chain. And we call it supply chain because it's all about the supply side. Yeah, it's the supply side where we get a lot of the problems. The demand side is very much, there's a lot of investment that people put into that in terms of trying to work out, well, what's the demand going to do? And as we talked about earlier, from a forecast point of view, generally get it wrong. Yeah, but the supply side, we can get some information about that, about what's going to happen. So where there's going to be issues with shipment availability, where there's going to be issues with transportation availability, or whether there's going to be there's stuff around the availability of resources. So here we go. What happens? Expect delays, you get information from suppliers saying this is not going to be available on time, or we've got a potential problem in terms of being able to deliver 6 months down the line. You get some pre-warning on some of those. You get some, this is actually being delayed. You have a shipment, it's going to be delayed. Why? Because the ship's got stuck in port. You've got a container load of equipment, especially if you're, say, supplying to an automotive or supplying high-tech electronics. That stuff's pretty critical. What you're going to do now, you've got to replan very, very quickly. Yeah? And then you've got to communicate that out to your various suppliers. You don't necessarily have the chance to actually go through a very long scenario analysis of saying, well, what happens in scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3. You're really just changing the inputs there and coming up with a whole load of outputs. And as we looked at again earlier, in terms of forecast accuracy, how do you know which one of those scenarios is going to be right? So the best thing to do is actually use the best judgment and go with one of those scenarios. React fast, move on it. Delays, we have machine breakdowns. That can be internal, that can be an external supplier that's providing you with material. You get insight that that's going to happen, and then you start to respond accordingly. Placing an order, is that ever bad? Can be if someone does it at the last minute. It's quite a disruptive thing to your supply chain. If someone goes and starts putting a lot of order or changing their forecast at the very last minute, you need to be able to rehash things very, very quickly. Can you do that with scenario analysis? Not necessarily. Strikes, what are you going to do once this has happened? So you get some, not too much warning when people are going to go on strike because they want to be disruptive. They're trying to do this. But you can kind of predict, due to some of the economic indicators and some of the murmurings, that these things are going to happen. You don't quite know when it's going to happen. So feeding this type of information in can actually help you in terms of doing your planning. Corona, we didn't have too much choice in that happening. That was just brought on by governments. Cancelling, in the same way, placing new orders can act as a disruption. So you can see there's a whole load of disruptions here that actually cause you a whole lot of pain within your supply chain. And the tools to handle this, I'll talk you through first two areas where we see these as don't go there, and then go to an option where it's like, this is where we see that this integration should actually take place. So in terms of the picture you're seeing up there, got a timeline across the bottom between the past, a little bit of historical information, from now right the way into the future. And then you've got a certain level of constraint in terms of how much flexibility that you have over that period of time. You're heavily constrained right at the very moment. Right now, you don't have a whole lot of choice in terms of what you can do. You can stop or start something generally, switch maybe a few orders in terms of priorities, who gets the output. On the right-hand side, you've got a lot of flexibility. You can go to new suppliers. You can bring a new supplier on board. You can't do that at this side here. So, of the two different planning processes there, what we quite sometimes see, and this is something which is a bit of a pitfall really, is to try and separate those two processes. To really separate them and have different people involved in those execution processes and the operations planning, and have different systems and different data models and different information being involved in that. And the wall that is built up between those two processes can be just an organizational element, or it could be something that is system related as well. So what you generally see is you see someone does planning on the sales and operations side of things, and they throw it over the wall to execution. Execution have a different model that they're working to. They execute, they do what they think is right. They then send it back and say, okay, planning, this is what I've done. Yeah? Anyone recognize this type of behavior, that operations are doing something different to what planning are doing because there's no joining up of the two systems together? So what's one of the ways of actually getting over that? Could actually say, connect everything together. Put it all into one model. Make everything work together. So that is also a bit of a big pitfall that you have within the environment, to actually try and say, and we see this quite regularly. You see this where you go into businesses where they're saying, well, I'm trying to adjust my inventory strategy because I ran out of this product last week. So I'm going to change my inventory strategy. That's not something that you would do in an operational environment, because that's something that needs to be done further out. But these people get involved and get distracted in the same way that someone should be looking at the way that they're looking to allocate a new supplier to particular material, to particular products, and use particular products from that supplier, but get tied up in a delay that's actually occurred with a shipping container. So the whole process of who's involved and who's responsible for what can get very disjointed. So what do we try and do? Try and do it within a planning continuum, where sales and operations execution and sales and operations planning are actually tightly integrated. So you can actually take any supply disturbances, because it's the supply disturbances that are really causing a lot of the problems within S&OP. People say it's the demand side. They don't understand the demand side. But you can run a scenario with high demand, medium demand, low demand, a different distribution of demand. Okay, that's all that you're actually changing in those scenarios. That's what a lot of people do within S&OP. But the actual problems are actually coming from the supply side of things. A lot of the problems are. So in this cycle, I've indicated it here as an infinite loop, because it doesn't really work to a particular cycle as such. You want a dynamic plan in both environments, so responding to the punches in each case. But between the two cycles, we run a filtering mechanism. So waiting until it all happens, these problems generally occur within the execution timeline. Strikes occur, delays occur, orders get cancelled. But using some probabilistic distributions of how often these things occur and who they occur with, yeah. So does a customer often cancel their orders? Is a shipment often delayed from a particular? So you think the lead time is going to be 6 weeks, and on a regular basis it's coming out 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 8 weeks. Should you actually change your lead time with what you actually plan in sales and operations planning? And actually then work with longer lead times for those particular products and actually procure those earlier? Should you have a different inventory strategy for those things? When you see these events occurring, there's a feed into sales and operations planning that actually takes those into account. So this is an infinite loop where it comes back around. The sales and operations planning, if you've changed the lead times, that would change the way that you do operations later on. So it's all within the same ecosystem, the same environment to actually do this. So predicting and responding. So this is exactly what's happening. You take your events that occur and recording those events and building a history up of this. This is not something that typically you capture within your ERP systems currently. So this is something which is going to be a new addition that's going to be taking place moving forward. So capturing those and then changing those into the predictions and the responses that we're going to then use to drive back into the operational environment, the synchronization between these two. So we're actually starting to predict in S&OP and then actually drive that response back into the operational environment. Beware of this intersection, because this is where you need to apply the logic around this. And to filter out the noise, because you don't want every single little event that's going on within the operational environment to start to disturb and create a lot of sensitivity within the S&OP environment. You still want to be able to do, and somewhat some of the scenario analysis within S&OP. So just beware of that, and that's where smart technology can actually start to enable this. So preparing for how we should respond. So sales and operations planning, you're saying, right, okay, well, we've constantly seen an increase in lead time from this particular vendor. We're taking up that information. So we should change the preference in terms of this particular vendor for these particular products, because they're not performing that well. So it's actually building in this loop of actually saying, right, okay, I'm going to change my vendor preferences. So I'm going to execute differently based on what I'm seeing at that level. And also use the knowledge of the events to actually drive these changes. So actually take these events that are occurring, pick up on those, and actually work out, well, what's the net effect of this? So delays. Is there a structural impact? Is there a structural effect of what these delays are actually having? So I'm using this transportation lane consistently, and I'm seeing performance decrease over that time. Should I actually be doing that? And then making a decision within S&OP of, should I do that? Yes or no? There's a better way of doing that. Run a simple or a set of responses there to actually decide what you should do there. So complete the loop. It's an action loop right the way around. So once impact's detected, then use that information. And what we're doing is we're picking up information now from external data sources outside of the four walls of the organization. We're picking up information from supply chain event services, picking that up, and then using generative AI to actually then say, well, what is the effect of that? It comes in a free format environment, and we've got to actually work out what is that going to have on some of the things that we've got in our environment. So is that container ship that's been delayed in a particular port? How many containers has it got on for? Is it impacting us? Which route's it going to take? Yeah, and is that going to impact on our supply chain, this one that's got stuck? This type of information, there's a lot of information out there now, is actually starting to capture this and use it within the environment to take the action. That's it. Anything more you want to chat to us about? This is just a teaser, so this isn't a real detail of all of the solution, but come and chat to us. We'll find us outside. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.